Monographs, The Subversion of the English Language. Video and script by Alex Sanderson. This is a video on politics in the English language by George Orwell, originally published 1945. The version being reviewed is from a collection by Penguin Books, 2013, pages 1 through 20. This video will be divided into 3 segments. The first is Discovery, where I tell the story of how I first came across the work. The second, the Synopsis, where I provide a summary of the work. The third is the Impact, where I muse about how I was personally affected by the work and ask questions like, what did the work cause me to think about? What questions did it raise, and can I begin to answer them? How will or how can the work change my beliefs, worldview, and/or behavior? This is the section where I will most likely make amateur attempts to psychoanalyze myself. Part 1, Discovery. I thought politics in the English language came to my attention after reading an Amazon review of Historians' Fallacies Toward a Logic of Historical Thought by David Hackett Fisher. Historians' Fallacies was an optional read for a college course and came highly recommended by the professor. I highly recommend it too, whether you are interested in history or not. However, when I went to find the review again for this video, I couldn't find it. I looked at Amazon reviews of other books I thought I was looking at the time, but I couldn't find the review anywhere. The reviewer mentioned that they kept Historians' Fallacies, Politics in English Language, and a few other books nearby so they could return to them every so often. Wherever I happened to come across politics in the English language, I decided to purchase a copy. I figured if it's by George Orwell, it has to be good. Part 2, Synopsis. Orwell asserts that modern English has picked up on some really bad habits. Contrary to other critics of his time, though, he believes these bad habits can be stamped out with some deliberate changes in how people speak and write. This is essential because, if left unchecked, the mind can descend into a dangerous spiral. Poor language will dull the mind. A dull mind will produce poor language. Poor language will produce a duller mind, etc., etc. Not only will language and the mind be affected, but so will politics. After citing 5 random passages from literature of his day as examples of poor English prose, Orwell observes that the 2 qualities the 5 passages have in common are 1. Staleness of imagery, and 2. Lack of precision. He goes on to list 4 tricks that are used to produce these 2 qualities. The first trick is the use of dying metaphors, or metaphors that outlive their usefulness and fail to evoke thought and imagination. The second trick is the use of operators, or extra phrases that add fluff to the writing or speech which makes the person sound smart and eloquent while adding nothing of substance. The third trick is the use of pretentious diction, or words and phrases that make the writer or speaker sound impartial or cultured, or to dignify that which wouldn't sound dignified if expressed plainly. The fourth trick is the use of meaningless words, or words which do not point to anything concrete, or which have multiple definitions depending on what group you are speaking to or speaking on behalf of. Orwell summarizes by saying that modern English is set up so that the writer or speaker doesn't have to think about what to write or speak. They can borrow words and phrases already whipped up and sound elegant in the process. To avoid this laziness, Orwell lists a handful of questions a writer or speaker should ask themselves with everything they write down. What am I trying to say? What words will express it? What image or idiom will make it clearer? Is this image fresh enough to have an effect? Can I put it more shortly? Have I said anything that is avoidably ugly? Orwell then connects this lazy trend in modern English with political speech. Political speech and writing has to consist mostly of euphemism, question-begging, and vagueness, because it engages in defending the indefensible. These ready-made phrases, idioms, and euphemisms are useful for describing something without having to conjure up any mental pictures of that something. Orwell exhorts his readers to remain constantly on guard against these tendencies of modern English, and gives 6 rules of writing to help in this defense. Rule number 1. Never use a metaphor, simile, or other figure of speech which you are used to seeing in print. Rule number 2. Never use a long word where a short one will do. Rule number 3. If it is possible to cut a word out, always cut it out. Rule number 4. Never use the passive when you can use the active. Rule number 5. Never use a foreign phrase, a scientific word, or a jargon word if you can think of an everyday English equivalent. Rule number 6. Break any of these rules sooner than say anything outright barbarous. One of the last instructions written in Orwell's tract is, quote, "If you simplify your English, you are freed from the worst follies of orthodoxy. You cannot speak any of the necessary dialects, and when you make a stupid remark, its stupidity will be obvious, even to yourself." Part 3. Impact. When I came to this section, I was having difficulties putting into words the impact politics and English language made on my thinking. After a while, I just started writing and ended up penning a diatribe. I'll keep it and I'll put it last, but it didn't exactly explain how I was affected by the work. I'm still not sure if I can. Politics in the English language made me recognize that I need to think about how I use language myself before I criticize its use by others. The diatribe I wrote was criticizing others, but I was implicitly criticizing myself as well, even if it may not sound like it. The beauty of this work, the beauty of politics in the English language, is that it forces me to come face to face with something I take for granted and take a long, hard look at that something, as well as my behavior toward it. The mundane and the commonplace are so easy to take for granted, to use or habitualize or acknowledge without a second thought. Time and again, though, I keep coming across something that shakes me and exclaims, "What you consider mundane is the last thing you should be taking for granted." Consciously changing your writing and speaking behavior sounds quite daunting. However, writing and speaking are skills just like riding a bike or building a house. With enough practice, even complex skills requiring many different actions and habits can become almost second nature. It's all a matter of how much time and effort you're willing to devote to the development of that skill. Anyway, here's the diatribe I wrote. There is an economic theory I learned in college called tragedy of the commons. It's when something is shared among a large group of people, and then that thing is depleted, abused, ill-maintained, and taken for granted. Each individual uses that something with only their interests in mind, and not the interests of the whole group. Think about public roads, parks, and trails. You'll find litter, graffiti, heavily abused or broken equipment, damaged signs, missing patches of grass, and sometimes worse signs of abuse. There is a lack of ownership and responsibility for public spaces. If it were your own lawn, your own driveway, your own house, you would not tolerate such abuse because it is your property that you maintain with your own time and money. The English language has suffered from something like the tragedy of the commons. We misuse and trivialize language without a thought on the repercussions. We don't consciously recognize the implications of language being shared. Those who came up with internet shorthands like LOL, BRB, and AFAIK probably thought they were being clever or helpful, but I have to wonder if they stopped to think about what the consequences would be for coming up with these conveniences. What would be the impact on the English language? Would it create habits in our communication outside of the internet? Would it create habits outside of our communication? You may think I'm picking on the internet shorthand in order to sound clever myself. Perhaps. But I'd like to think I'm using the example of internet shorthand to make a broader point about language. When an individual or a group introduces a new word, a new phrase, a new figure of speech, or even redefines any of the above, they show no signs of thinking about the implications of what they're doing. Take the words liberal and conservative. Words that are bounced around in the political realm so much that I have to wonder if they mean anything anymore. By demonizing the word liberal, are you saying that new isn't good? Are you saying you are opposed to the freedom of the individual and the ability of the government to protect that freedom? By demonizing conservative, are you saying that the old isn't good? Are you saying that moderation is not acceptable? Are you saying that nothing is worth preserving? This all might sound silly, but this is exactly what Orwell was warning against. Quote, "People who write in this manner usually have a general emotional meaning. They dislike one thing and want to express solidarity with another, but they are not interested in the detail of what they are saying. A scrupulous writer, in every sentence that he writes, will ask himself at least 4 questions thus. What am I trying to say? What words will express it? What image or idiom will make it clearer? Is this image fresh enough to have an effect?" And he will probably ask himself 2 more. Could I put it more shortly? Have I said anything that is avoidably ugly? But you are not obliged to go to all this trouble. You can shirk it by simply throwing your mind open and letting the ready-made phrases come crowding in. They will construct your sentences for you, even think your thoughts for you to a certain extent. And at need, they will perform the important service of partially concealing your meaning, even from yourself. That's all for my thoughts on politics and English language. Have a good day and may peace be with you.